For decades, American drones have ruled the battlefield. They're highly precise at hitting targets and incredibly expensive, costing in the millions of US dollars. These drones are sophisticated and powerful, and access to them is tightly controlled. Then came the war in Ukraine, a conflict that's been defined by drones from China, Iran, and Turkey. Advances in off-the-shelf commercial technologies have helped manufacturers build complex war machines at much lower prices. And it's changed how drone combat works, and who can wage it. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in 2 U.S. cities.
As the disc rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte Abishur. I present to you Electro, the Moto Man. Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
This episode, we look at the implications of commercial drones on the battlefield for international security and geopolitics.
Support for this podcast comes from Align AI, helping enterprise teams create data and AI playbooks to drive adoption and governance.
Drones used to be really about two things: reconnaissance and also very surgical targeted strikes. And drones used to be controlled really by America and its allies in terms of the export and who had access to them. Now, the Ukraine war is making drones the main vehicle to fight wars. My name is Abishur Prakash. I'm the CEO of the Geopolitical business, a geopolitical advisory firm in Toronto, Canada. So it's no longer just about those peripheral roles, if you will, but now it's become the main way that nations are fighting one another. And this is a powerful transformation because it means that drones as a technology are playing a role in warfare and have evolved into a role in warfare that no other technology has made that transition yet. Every other technology is still on the edge of making that transition, going to where drones have gone today.
In a way, we've been watching the nature of war shift before our eyes, in the skies above Ukraine.
It's not just Russia and Ukraine fighting one another, but it's Iran and Turkey. That Turkish and Iranian drones supplied to either side are fighting each other above the skies of Ukraine. So drones have given other governments a way to play a role in this conflict, a way to have a new kind of geopolitical power and have a say in terms of, will we supply the drones? Well, how much will we supply? What kind of capabilities will we supply? Majority of the Iranian drones that Russia is using are being deployed for kamikaze missions. They're really just suicide attacks on what Russia believes are enemy targets. Meanwhile, the Turkish drones are being used in a very targeted, very strategic way. For example, targeting Russian oil depots within Russian territory itself, or even the sinking of the Moskva, Russia's most powerful warship in the Black Sea. Allegedly, the Turkish drones played a role there too.
And in this new era of drones and warfare, companies are also getting a say.
The Turkish drone company Baykar wants to build a drone factory in Ukraine, while Iran is looking at building its own drone factory near Moscow. So now companies like Baykar are building the next assembly lines, not within their own borders, i.e. Turkey. They're building the next assembly lines and factory lines within the war zone itself. That is unprecedented for a company to do that. And as Baykar does this is Baykar gives Kiev its own drone factory. The kind of drones that will be manufactured will change. Already, Ukraine has said that they need hundreds of thousands of drones to fight Russia. Now, that can't all be strategic drones. That also has to be an array, a spectrum of different drones that they need. There is a new complex geopolitical web emerging around drones. So Russia is using Iranian drones. Israel went and conducted a strike within Iran that targeted a weapons factory that was allegedly producing drones that were being supplied to Russia. So you have this complex geopolitical web emerging where a conflict in Eastern Europe suddenly is connected to a conflict in the Middle East, and the glue connecting them is drones.
Drone technologies used to be controlled by defense companies, and the gateway to the most advanced drones went through Washington.
If America gave you the permission, then you had access and you could purchase the drones. If America didn't, tough luck. You were out in the cold. Now, countries have multiple options, whether it's Turkey, whether it's Iran, whether it's Israel, whether it's China. For example, China is building a drone factory in Saudi Arabia to produce one of its most advanced drones. Whether it's India is also trying to build its own drone ecosystem to compete. So now countries have multiple nations they can go to and say, we need this military equipment.
That in itself is a profound change. But he says the bigger consequence of that is the number of nations with a drone army will increase. And suddenly, countries will have the power to do things geopolitically that they couldn't do before.
So in many ways, Pandora's box has been opened. And as nations gain these advanced military capabilities, or the other side of the coin, as nations have access to large quantities of basic drones, so either they're going to have a very advanced drone army or they're going to have access to massive quantities of very basic drones, the game changes completely in conflict zones around the world.
And he believes the next few years could see dozens of Western tech companies get into the drone business, both for consumers and countries. Meanwhile, the playbook for what's deemed okay and not okay in terms of how these drones are deployed, that remains quite murky. There's no clear answer as to what crosses the line.
What are the red lines? For example, the drone attack on the Kremlin. Now, nobody knows who was behind that. Was it an external actor? Was it an inside job? Was it some crazy teenagers running their own drones into the Kremlin? But that in itself is a massive threat because it's another sign of how consumer drones can drive geopolitics, how average people can willy-nilly send their drones and escalate tensions.
And governments are increasingly relying on the private sector to develop military technology.
There is almost these geopolitical layers being established. And what I mean by that is you have layer one, Russia goes into Ukraine and tries to control the critical infrastructure, one of them being internet. Layer two, a company called SpaceX steps in and says, hey, we're going to provide the Kiev government with Starlink, keep it online. Layer three, Turkey begins to double down on supplying drones to Ukraine. Layer four, Kiev uses Starlink to conduct drone missions using the Turkish drones. So there is now this fusion taking place between the technology companies. It's almost like a technology partnership, not just a public-private partnership. That's redefining geopolitics. And there is no precedent for that in modern times.
We'll be back right after this.
Hackers and cybercriminals have always held this kind of special fascination. Obviously, I can't tell you too much about what I do.
It's a game. Who's the best hacker? And I was like, well, this is child's play.
I'm Dina Temple-Raston, and on the Click Here podcast, you'll meet them and the people trying to stop them.
We're not afraid of the attack. We're afraid of the creativity and the intelligence of the human being behind it.
Click Here, stories about the people making and breaking our digital world.
AI machines. Satellite. Engine ignition.
Click Here.
And liftoff.
Every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
What are the implications on international security of the fact that commercial derived technology is now starting to be as effective as defense technology used to be for long-range missions? Hey, I'm Lorenz Meier. I'm the founder and CEO of Auterion, and we're building a software platform for drones. The easiest way to describe it is the Android for drones. That changes everything, because one of these Iranian systems is just about $20,000 in parts. That's a fraction of what a cruise missile costs. And unfortunately, it's also a fraction what a air defense missile costs. And so now suddenly you have a numbers game where, from a logistical perspective, the whole ground has shifted. And I personally believe that this is as transformative for international security as the invention of the airplane was.
He believes governments need to lean into the development of drones in order to be competitive.
Because it's very likely that state actors like China are going to employ that technology in a conflict in the future. And it's problematic that governments and states that so far haven't played a huge role when it comes to aerospace, like Iran, suddenly crop up as relevant forces. But I'm optimistic. I mean, the invention of the airplane didn't bring the world down. It brought new challenges. It brought new opportunities. We're all used to transcontinental flight now. But we have to deal with it. We have a war in Europe, the largest land war probably since World War II. That is using drone technology, right now mostly consumer, in fact, drone technology, at a mass scale for the first time, and at an innovation speed and cycle that will alter this industry, that will move it forward a decade in a year.
And all this, it's happening at the same time as a massive increase in government budgets for autonomous tech.
And those are all the ingredients that I believe will lead to a huge leap forward in terms of moving to a software-defined world when it comes to autonomous systems, but also to mass adoption. And that will flow all back into commercial applications as well. So I'm not wanting to paint a picture where this is all defense, but it's a formidable challenge. I also believe that we will need new regulations for this technology, but I'm a technology optimist. And I think the same way as in the end, the airplane brought us a lot of benefits that we all have gotten used to, drones will bring that too, and will now be really commonplace and not this niche thing that everybody talks about but doesn't use in their day-to-day.
To support this vision of a future filled with mobile robotics, including drones, rovers, and boats, his company is building a complete software stack that's meant to allow autonomous systems to complete these high-level tasks, like deliveries, entirely on their own.
What we're building is very, very new. And explaining that is as hard as explaining how new the internet or personal computers were in like 1991, where computers had existed for at least 20 years. And when you then told somebody, hey, there's this new thing, this personal distributed computer, and this other thing, this internet that networks different computers of different types, I don't think it was immediately clear how pivotal that would be for the world. Because, hey, it's a computer, I know a computer. Same thing for mobile computing. 2005, 2006, we had this situation that you had phones with touchscreens, you had phones with cameras, you had different operating systems that were all proprietary. Sony had their own, Nokia had their own. And now we're in the same situation with drones.
Drones don't have a common operating system, nor do they run apps on board. He expects that will change, and the people working on that shift are starting to call it autonomous computing.
And we're getting the exact same reactions as these first two waves of computing got, which is like, oh, you're connecting it to the internet. Well, I don't need internet on my drone. I just need the video feed on my controller. I don't want to upload images straight from the drone to the cloud. I can do that on my laptop. It's literally the same argument as I don't need a web browser on my phone, or the screen of the phone is way too small for e-commerce. And of course, from today's perspective, we're all laughing about that.
With smartphones, apps like Uber and Instagram now seem obvious, but that's only in hindsight.
So I believe when it comes to autonomous computing, we're about in the same level of understanding. We know that onboard apps will be relevant. We know that inspection, mapping, reconnaissance, cargo are all valid applications. But it's really hard for anybody to predict whether, like, the key applications that we will need will be Instagram or Facebook or whatever there is. A lot of these drive smartphone usage today a lot. What I can say is we've identified the equivalent of Google Maps or Apple Maps, which I do believe was one of the really important pivotal applications that drove smartphone adoption. And for autonomous systems, this is about safe routing, knowing the airspace. It's about potentially also navigating when you lose GPS coverage, so referencing your position towards the ground. So there is some geospatial element to it.
These days, the state of the art with drone tech is remote control over large, semi-autonomous fleets of drones. For example, his company Auterion powers a drone fleet made up of hundreds of systems for Walmart as part of its last-mile delivery system.
And it's quite interesting that you see all the typical, I would say, computing fleet challenges emerge as part of that application. You need to roll out remote software updates. They need to be fast enough. We're doing predictive maintenance. So those drones share their flight data and it gets analyzed in real time to look for possible issues or defects to get ahead of the situation. There's a lot of like maintenance and taking care of the fleet and keeping it up to date and keeping it managed that I would say is for the first time at this scale relevant.
Up until now, drones have simply been remotely piloted aircraft, meaning for decades the pivotal transition that drones offered was just a pilot on the ground and a video feed on board.
And that is really the only thing we've achieved in the last 10 years, which is already a miracle and made flying, like helicopter-like flying, a lot more accessible. The thing is, it still required a pilot, and it still requires, like a drone pilot is on a similar salary level like a private aviation pilot, same order of magnitude. So you haven't actually saved that much cost. You have saved operating costs of the vehicle, but not of the human resources part. What we're now starting to see is full automation, where cargo drones don't need a pilot anymore. They're still being supervised, of course, but it's kind of eliminating the pilot role, and what you retain is the air traffic control role. And what I'm expecting to continue, and which we're starting to do already commercially, is that you just provide high-level goals. Like think of delivery. Instead of telling each of 4 or 6 drones where to go and where to fly, you're just telling the drone hub, hey, I have 4 deliveries in the next 15 minutes in these locations, go figure out. And so you go from directing an aircraft to just allocating tasks. And that's happening today. That's not the future.
It dramatically cuts the operations cost and makes possible a world where delivering with a drone can be significantly less expensive than doing it by car. And these fleets will be useful for much more than just final mile deliveries.
When we talk about fleets in inspection or mapping, what we're expecting is that we have a shift from today where you have an operator or pilot drive up to a construction site or to a power line or to a power substation, and then launch a drone, fly around that area, take pictures, take the micro SD card out of the drone into the laptop, and then back at the office, upload the images to some processing service, which is pretty much the workflow today. We expect that to shift completely, where you can launch a drone remotely that's, for example, positioned on a Walmart. Why should there be only cargo drones? Or positioned on I know that, for example, cell tower operators have pitched earlier the idea that they could host drone boxes on their cell towers and offer the same service. So we've heard both. And you could launch a drone from there to maybe a location a mile away, which is the construction site, do that inspection, do the mapping mission, bring the drone back, have it automatically charge, upload the images straight from the drone. And that way, you save not just the time of the operator while they are on site, more importantly, you save the time to drive up to the job site, which in our estimates is the majority of time spent on a job for a drone pilot.
This show is produced by me and Anthony Green with help from Emma Cillekens. It's mixed by Garret Lang with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong.